You can see that our website is monarchhousing.org, and we will be moving forward. I'm going to turn it over to Olu to start our presentation today.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're going to start by sharing some resources that we have available, just like Jay mentioned. The first is our point-in-time data collection guide. You will see information about who to count in the point-in-time count, the sheltered and unsheltered count procedures, general survey guidelines, survey definitions, tips for conducting respondent interviews, survey questions, inputting data online, completing the survey questions online, questions and contact information, most of which we will be describing here. Next, we're going to look at the point-in-time quick reference guide, which talks about the definitions that might be helpful to you while conducting these interviews. One example we'd like to share is the definition of safe haven, which sometimes people have assumed means a domestic violence shelter, which is not the case. So here you're able to figure out if somebody says, we were at a safe haven the night before, we're able to say it's a 24-hour private or semi-private residence for not more than 25 homeless persons and things like that. So you know exactly what you will be or what people will be responding to. The next thing that we have is how we get our information, which is from the HUD Guidance. And so if you need information on the methodology and the data collection as well, and for our housing inventory count, you can find all of that on the links that we share in this webinar. So next, we talk about what is the point-in-time count. If you're new to this, it's a count of homeless persons in a given area on a single night, which will be Tuesday night into Wednesday of the 25th. So we start counting on the night of the 24th and the day of 25th. The point-in-time count should be statistically reliable, unduplicated, inclusive of sheltered or unsheltered homeless, and it's conducted during the last week of January, like I just mentioned. That is a hard requirement. It's planned, coordinated, and carried out locally by all of you who are here with us today. So why do we do a point-in-time count? We gather this data for local homeless planning purposes. We find out who is homeless, where the homeless find shelter, and the factors that are contributing to the homelessness in the community. Also, it's important to know what services are needed by the homeless as you guys plan towards helping reduce homeless in your different counties. It is a hard requirement for COC funding, so that's another reason why we do it. So who do we count in the pit count? According to HUD, a person should be counted as homeless if that person is unsheltered. That is, they sleep somewhere not designed as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, such as a car, park, abandoned building, bus, train, street, or sidewalk. We also count the sheltered homeless, which are those that lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. We have a supervised emergency shelter, safe haven, or transitional housing dedicated solely for the homeless as a primary nighttime residence. This also includes domestic violence and youth shelters. We also count the at-risk of homeless, so those who are doubled up in another household, living in illegal dwelling units, living in overcrowded units with more than one and a half persons per room, who are scheduled to be evicted with no subsequent residence. They've been discharged from jail or prison with no subsequent residence. They've been discharged from a health facility with no subsequent residence, residing in a motel unit that is being paid for by that household. And we report this to HUD after the count. So how do we count, or how are we going to count in 2017? We're going to use the paper survey for our unsheltered. Most of you will be out in the streets getting this information. For the sheltered count, we will be using the HEMIS report, so what you guys put in the HEMIS throughout the year. But there is an updated, you have to update the HEMIS to reflect the night of the count. So if not in HEMIS, we use a paper survey. All shelter programs will submit a summary survey form, which we'll talk about next, and will also be described a little bit more in detail. And as for those at risk of homelessness as well, we also use the paper survey. The online survey is available for your use if you are, able to do it. But please just make sure that you have all the accurate information as much as possible. And please make sure you wait to the end of the webinar, because Jay is going to be describing exactly how to put in that information online.
And just one addition to that, just to distinguish, if you're looking at this sheltered line and distinguishing between those programs that will be able to use HMIS for the point in time count and those who will not be able to, who are shelter programs, one very key group that would not be in HMIS but provides shelter or transitional housing would be domestic violence providers. So make sure to inquire if you're a point-in-time coordinator or if you're a program within your community. Make sure you know how your data is going to get collected for some of these programs that may not be in HMIS, so that we make sure they can conduct paper surveys and get that information into SurveyMonkey.
Absolutely. So next we're talking about the sheltered summary form, which all shelters have to provide. Again, this still has to be for the night of the count. As you see, the county, the agency name, program name, HEMIS program name, and total number of people served on the night of January 24, combined for total adults and children. You will find this summary form on the website at monarchhousing.org. The next thing we're going to show you is how the paper survey looks. It is 13 questions. We're going to describe to you again in detail how we should fill this out, but it's a pretty simple form, and so this is how you would be conducting the survey. When is the 2017 PIT count? I mentioned it, but just to say it again, it is conducted from Tuesday, January 24th, until that's the night of the count, starting from sunset at 12 a.m. To Wednesday, January 25th. Night count only on the night of January 24th, like I just said, and then the daytime count only on January 25th. You can also do a 7-day service based on sheltered count. The general survey guidelines. Only one survey should be conducted per household, and a household is defined as any group of persons who will be housed together if they were able to obtain permanent housing. So in the past, we would do one for the head of the household, and we will do for the children, for example. We don't need to do that anymore. We only need one for each household. Surveys should be conducted by interviewers and should not be given to respondents to fill out too. You have to instruct your volunteers. They are the ones who are asking the questions as well as filling out the paper survey. Do not read all answer options to the respondent unless the question says to check all that apply. So, for example, I think number one, you only need to check one. So you ask the respondent, and they tell you the answer, and you fill it in. If no response is given to any question on the survey, please leave the answer blank. The only exception will be for number 7, where the respondent's relationship to head of household, age, gender, race, and ethnicity. Please guess this field for respondent, and respondent may guess on 7 if unsure about other household members. And lastly, if no response for question 1, do not complete survey. If there are no options there, or they just don't want to answer, you don't have to complete the survey. Other instructions include, if you're a veteran program, label all clients as veterans. So when you're filling out the paper survey for them, please indicate that they are veterans. If you're a domestic violence program, label all clients as victims of domestic violence. Again, we want to make sure that we get the accurate information, and we don't always know, just based on program name. This year is a baseline year for youth count. So remember, if you're asking additional questions for youth, we want to coordinate with your PIT coordinator to make sure you pass on that information as well. If your program is in HEMIS, paper surveys from your program will not be counted unless it identifies that client stayed in a location other than the program location. So like we said, please make sure your HIMSS information is updated for each of your clients. During deduplication, an agency-conducted paper survey will be used over a duplicate from another count location. HIMSS records will be used over duplicate surveys. So if we have your HIMSS record, we assume that it's updated, and we will use that over duplicate surveys. Lastly, HIMSS participating programs that are entering multiple services into the same program in HIMSS will not be able to have their information pulled from HIMSS for the PIT. And so just some tips for conducting the interviews. Please introduce yourself. Ask if they've already taken the survey. We don't need to be conducting multiple surveys, and they may have done the survey at another Project Homeless Connect site or wherever. So ask them if they've already taken the survey. Let respondent know answers are anonymous. Conduct the survey in a quiet, private manner. Try not to ask compound questions. Use the survey questions to guide interview. Ask questions to clarify if necessary. Be friendly, respectful, and polite. And lastly, thank respondents for their time. And so now I'll pass it off to Jay.
Thank you, Olu. So as you can see, we're going to move on to the point-in-time count paper survey itself. We're going to go through piece by piece so that everybody understands what the pieces of this survey are. If you look at the top of our point-in-time survey for NJCounts 2017, there's 4 fields that aren't numbered as questions, but they're really important, and that's why they're kind of at the top. These are the code, county, agency, and program names. So if you are a participating agency or you're a volunteer working with someone at a Project Homeless Connect site, every point-in-time count location or group that's going out or agency that's providing services has its own distinct code that's been assigned by Monarch in conjunction with your point-in-time coordinator. So if you don't know what your agency's code is, or it hasn't been pre-populated by your point-in-time coordinator in your community, make sure you get that information prior to doing point-in-time surveys, because this is going to be really helpful if there's any question about the data that's been completed on your survey, to track back where that survey was completed and make sure we have accurate information, especially helpful during the deduplication process to make sure we're not counting people more than once. So that's a 5-digit code, and make sure if you don't have that information, contact your local point-in-time coordinator. The other identifying information is pretty self-explanatory: the county in which that survey is completed, and the agency that is completing it, and the program if it's completed. In some cases, it may not be that there's an agency or a program. It just may be your street count. Just make sure that all of these fields at the top are filled out appropriately in conjunction with your guidance from your point-in-time coordinator. Then we're getting into our survey questions. Question 1 is the most important question. We want to know where folks spent the night of Tuesday, January 24th, 2017. If, as Olu said, there is no answer to this question, we can't use the information from this survey. This is a housing survey. We're trying to figure out whether someone was actually experiencing homelessness that night. And so it's really key to get an answer to this question if possible. You can see, as Olu alluded to as well, that in parentheses after question 1, it says check 1 answer only. So you'll see later on in our presentation that there's some questions that say check all that apply. The difference between how I'm going to ask one that says check 1 only and one that says check all that apply is that when it's check 1 only, I'm only asking the question that's written in bold by the number of the question. So if I'm asking this question of a respondent, I'm saying, where did you spend the night of Tuesday, January 24th? And then I'm not reading any of these options to them. I'm just letting them respond, interpreting their response, and filling out the form appropriately. The methodology behind that is we don't want to feed someone something other than the truth and get that stuck in their head before they answer. Okay, so that's just a key thing to remember when you see check 1 only. Just ask the question in the bold text. You can see that these are some of the answers on our quick reference guide, or not answers, but definitions. This is just to help you or someone who's a volunteer for the first time understand what these answers mean. Some of them may be unfamiliar to someone who's not in the homeless service world who's not working with clients every day and consumers who are seeking housing. So just use that tool to help you and your volunteers. Question 1, you're just going to check the one response that they give you, and then you'll move on to question 2. Okay, question 2 is, in what town did you spend the night? And you can see that it's asking for a little bit more than that. It's asking for town, county, state, and if applicable, program name and agency name. So if that person was staying in the Ending Homelessness program at Monarch Housing, I would say that they stayed in Cranford in Union County in the state of New Jersey at the Ending Homelessness program at Monarch. If this person, say, spent the night on the street, then I would definitely not have a program or agency name of the program that they stayed in. I may still be able to just get the town, county, and state of where they stayed. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's why this says if applicable on question number 2. Okay, and just remember, if you are at a Project Homeless Connect event, don't just jump to the conclusion that you know where the person stayed that past night. As you can see in our second bullet point here, it says that where the survey is being completed is not necessarily where that respondent was. So if there's a Project Homeless Connect event at the local shelter, that doesn't mean that everybody who walks in stayed there. So don't jump to the conclusion that you know where they stayed. Just make sure you get some accurate information right from them. And if the respondent isn't part of anything or chooses not to respond to any of the answers in this survey, you can leave the fields all blank, okay? So that's how we're going to know if any of the responses on your paper survey are not responded to, or someone chose not to give a response, is if it's blank, okay? Question number 3, how long have you been in your current living situation? You'll see there's 3 boxes next to years, months, and days. And please remember, and help your volunteers and surveyors to remember, that this is only asking about their most recent continuous living situation. Okay, so this is a really key distinction. So we're asking, let's say the person in question number 1 says that where they spent last night, the night of the point in time count, January 24th into the morning of the 25th, that they stayed in an emergency shelter. Okay, so what we're asking in question 3 is, how long has their current stay at that shelter been? So you can see our second bullet point gives a for instance. Let's say that the respondent says they've been homeless on and off for 2 years, but most recently lost their housing only 2 weeks ago. That means if they've just stayed in the most recent stay at this shelter for 2 weeks, that we're just going to write 14 days. We're not taking into account the on and off period. We're just asking about their most recent continuous living situation, this particular streak of time where they've stayed in the same place. Okay, and if the respondent is in a shelter or transitional housing program, their length of stay in that program can be said to correspond to the length of their current living situation, right? So if they entered a transitional program a few days prior, then that is where they've had their most recent continuous living situation, and you can answer appropriately. Please do be mindful that when you're entering data here, our instructions later on for entering this data into SurveyMonkey are going to ask you to put it in the simplest form possible. So when we're entering data into SurveyMonkey, if someone answered 18 months, we're still going to ask that in the SurveyMonkey data entry that you enter 1 year and 6 months. So if you can instruct your volunteers to fill it out in that way, in the simplest, most reduced form possible for all of the units, we'd appreciate it. Question 4, during the past 12 months, how many months have you been homeless on the streets, in emergency shelter, or in a safe haven? So this is a really, really critical question, as are all of these first few on the first page of our survey in the paper form. The reason being is that this is going to help us understand whether the person meets the federal definition of chronic homelessness. Okay, so it's really important to get accurate information for these questions, but these are also some tricky questions to get folks to answer, especially someone who's in a stressful position under duress from lack of housing. It's really sometimes helpful, in my opinion, to ask them what their story was, how they've been living and where they've been living over the past 12 months. Maybe if they tell you their story, you can figure out the answer with them and help jog their memory for accurate information. And then you're also engaging with that person and understanding a little bit about their story. But it's really important that you just answer a whole number here. And we're just going to ask the number of full months as well. So let's say the person you asked this question says, well, I've been homeless for 2 weeks over the past 12 months. That would still be a 0, okay? See, as you can see in our bullet point, that's also if they've never been homeless. So if they're not homeless at all, so let's say in question 1, this person responded to you that they've been staying in permanent housing, right? They're just doubled up with a family or a friend. They may not have technically been on the streets in emergency shelter or in a safe haven in the past 12 months, so the answer would be 0. So just take note of those pieces when you're answering question 4, and you and your volunteers will be great on the paper survey. Okay, question 5. How many separate times have you been homeless on the streets, in emergency shelter, or in a safe haven within the past 3 years? And then there's a date since January 24, 2014. Again, this is one of those questions that's really critical for us to determining whether someone meets the federal definition of chronically homeless, meaning that they have a number of episodes of homelessness over the past 3 years. It's also a tricky question. I mean, for someone who may have had an existence where they've bounced around a little bit, it may just, again, be helpful to get their story and work with them on figuring out what that timeline is for them and where they've stayed. And then you can see our bullet points. This is really important. We're asking about the total number of distinct episodes of homelessness that they've experienced in the past 3 years. So what does that mean? This is a little bit tricky, right? So if someone is staying on the streets for 4 months and then goes into an emergency shelter, technically, in both cases, they're still homeless. So whether they've been spending time in the emergency shelter or in, a unsheltered location, technically that's still one continuous episode. So we go to our second bullet point. This is a real key. Distinct episodes of homelessness should be separated by at least 7 days in a non-homeless location, right? So let's say it's someone who says, oh, okay, last year I was homeless and I had to go to an emergency shelter for a few weeks, but then I went and lived with a relative, and now all of a sudden this year I'm back in the shelter. You would have to just make sure that you know how long that person had lived with their relative. If it's at least 7 days, then you'll be able to know that those are 2 distinct episodes, right? And we also want to make sure, and you see in the third bullet point, if someone was homeless and they think, oh, how many separate times, that doesn't mean separate nights, okay? So if there's multiple nights in a row, those are still only 1 episode of homelessness. So if someone has been staying in the homeless shelter consistently and only there for the past 365 days, that's still only 1 continuous episode of homelessness. Okay? And again, like we said in question 4, you may be talking to someone who's been staying in permanent housing in the past 3 years, and they've never had an episode of homelessness. So you could enter 0 there. Make sure you just enter a number in the field here for question 5, and that's all really important. Question 6, what is the total number of months that you've been homeless on the streets, in emergency shelter, or in a safe haven within the past 3 years? So question 5, you're asking about the number of episodes that they've experienced of homelessness in the past 3 years. This is the total number of months altogether that they've experienced homelessness in the past 3 years. So you can enter that number again in the field that's provided. If the respondent has been homeless for less than 1 month, again, if they've been homeless for 2 weeks, you can enter 0. And if the respondent has never been in a homeless location, so they say, no, I've been in permanent housing or doubled up with someone for the past 3 years, then you can write a 0 as well, or an NA. Okay. All right, so question 7 is the biggest question in our survey in terms of getting a real broad cross-section of information about not only this household as a whole, but of the individuals that make it up. So it's a really crucial question, and it's one of the most complicated, so we're going to take a little bit of time on it. As you can see, it's called, titled about household information, but there's two sections. There's the demographic information, where we're getting some individual identifying information, and then there's the household characteristics section. All right, so we're going to break those down. But before I go to that, I do want to point out something here because it's the first time we see it in our survey. Under household characteristics, you see it says check all that apply to each person. So when I see that moniker underneath a question, I know that what that means is I can offer to read each of the options to the respondent to make sure they know that these are the specific characteristics that I'm asking about. Okay, so when I'm asking the question, I could ask, so is anyone in your household a victim of domestic violence, a veteran having any sort of disabling condition that I'm reading off here, or does none of these factors or characteristics apply to that household member? All right, so this is also really critical in question 7. We're asking about who was homeless with you on the night of January 24th. The reason that this is a critical way of asking the question is that you can see our first bullet point asks that you should fill this out as completely as possible for each household member that shared the identified sleeping arrangements on the night of the count. So what does that mean? That means you may be interviewing someone who is a woman who has a child, but she slept in her car last night, okay, on the night of the 24th, and so she was in a homeless location. But excuse me, I have unintentionally changed the slide, but her child did not stay with her in that car that night. Instead, her child was with a family member. Okay, so it's really critical that you not fill out this survey and include the child's information, because technically that child was not homeless on the night of the count. Okay, only that woman who is your respondent would be. So that's really a critical factor in distinguishing who was homeless with that person on the night of the count. Okay, if the household members spent the night separately, do not include their information. Even if they were in a different homeless location, hopefully their information will be captured in another way. Okay, if the respondent is unsure about information for some members of the household, have them give their best guess, right? So with relationship to head of household, whoever you are interviewing is the self, is the head of household, right? So it could be the matriarch or patriarch of the family, but it could also be the 18-year-old son of two parents who doesn't really know how old exactly his mom or dad is. Maybe they forgot, or maybe it's someone who has relatives or friends that stayed with them that night, and they're not entirely sure of their age or how they choose to identify their race, or some of these other household characteristics, like whether they're a veteran or a victim of domestic violence. Regardless, we're asking that whoever you're talking to, because they're the person that you're interfacing with and is your best shot at getting information about all the other members of their household, that if they're not sure of any answers, that you ask them to give their best guess for these fields. That's really critical, that we get as much information as accurately as possible for the various members of their household. Okay, if the respondent gives no response for themselves with regard to age, gender, ethnicity, or race, you should guess those answers, okay? And I'll tell you why. Let's say you're talking to someone on the street doing a paper survey, and they are unwilling to give you their age, gender, or ethnicity, or race. You can observe all of those things since you're speaking to that person, right? You can give a guess about their age and gender and about their ethnicity and race. Especially for age and gender, this is really, really critical for our deduplication process at Monarch, okay? The way that we deduplicate our surveys is we use the initials and the age and gender of the respondent to create a unique identifier for each record. And what's really critical is that we be able to use all of those factors to make sure we don't count anybody twice. The other reason is that when we report this data to HUD, and the required fields include age and gender, because we want to know if they're a man or woman or identifying in a different way, And HUD is also making sure that we tell them whether it's a youth or an adult or a senior. It's all very important distinctions when we're reporting our data. So please make sure you and your respondents take guesses for the respondent that might not give you the information about themselves in these categories. But, as you can see reading further, do not guess about other demographic and personal characteristics for the household members that you're not seeing. Right? That's just pure speculation. If they say, oh yeah, I stayed on the street and so did my friend who is part of my household, we stayed together, and they're unwilling to give you information about them, so you take a guess, and then you know that there's a friend, but they don't give you any information about that friend, don't guess all that information for the person that you're not actually privy to and present with. The reason being is that it's pure speculation. We don't want to fabricate information. We just want to get as accurate a picture as possible. All right, thanks for bearing with me. I know it's a long question. Let's break it down. When you're on the demographic information section, the first column is asking about the relationship to the head of household. You can see that there's numbered rows. That's kind of going to be a helpful thing for you when you're entering data online. But in the numbered rows, row number 1 should always be dedicated to self, right? So that's the respondent. So that's pre-populated for you, and you can fill out the respondent's information. As you can see, we're asking for initial, middle initial, and then first 2 letters of last name. If there's no middle initial, you can leave it blank. That's okay. Every member of the household's relationship to the respondent should be provided. So let's say you're talking to a person who has a spouse and is also living with their parent, child, and sibling, and another relative and a friend, right? This is all in reference to this person. So as you can see, head of household doesn't necessarily mean the oldest person, because this person is living with their parent. It's whoever you're interviewing that you can characterize everyone's relationship as they are related to the person you're talking to. All right, so that's really important. Also really important, as Olu mentioned, really critical to emphasize for some of the folks you may be interviewing in unsheltered locations who you're doing a paper survey with. This survey is totally anonymous. None of this information about their initials is collected for any other reason except for just deduplicating. We just want to make sure we don't count people twice. We are not reporting information that is identifying to anyone, and we are not keeping and maintaining any files on these pieces of information. That is just a key thing to help reassure people. If you can, some folks will just not want to participate, but if there's any way to get folks who are reticent to participate, please make sure you mention how anonymous this is. All right, moving on to age, gender, ethnicity, and race. Just wanted to point out that you can put a number in the age section. Gender, I want to update something here that we'll put in our slides when we put them on the website. So you can see there's 3 options listed here. There's also a 4th option that HUD created this year. So it's F for female, M for male, TR for transgender, and then DI for those who choose not to identify in any other category. All right, so that's key to remember for gender. There's a DI. And where you can find these abbreviations is in our PIT abbreviations guide that your coordinators have sent out to you, is also available on Monarch's website. So you can refer to those abbreviations there for your reference. For ethnicity, there's really only 2 options: Hispanic or non-Hispanic. And then for race, you can see you can list all that apply for the following races. So folks who choose to identify as both black and white, as multiracial, you can do that. Just separate those abbreviations by a comma and list whichever racial identities those folks choose to identify with. One key thing, if you can see this bullet here, it says if the respondent is Hispanic, inform them that they must choose a race from the list above in addition to identifying their ethnicity as Hispanic. That may seem very counterintuitive to someone, right? But this is determined by the way that our federal government does its census and the way that we divide up identities into both ethnicity and racial identity. So it may be confusing to someone to say, okay, are you Hispanic and black or Hispanic and white? but they could also choose to identify in a different way racially. Even if they are Hispanic, please ask them to also select a race that they choose to identify with. Again, if someone doesn't give a response for gender and age, we really can't use that survey information. So please, for every respondent, at least get the household member age and gender for each member of the household. All right. Moving on to the household characteristics section, again, we're checking all that apply to each person. So let's say we have multiple members of the household. We can say, okay, are any of those folks you just told me about a victim of domestic violence, a veteran, having any form of mental health, substance abuse, physical disability, or developmental disability, chronic health condition, or HIV/AIDS? Really, the most important column in this section is this last one, which you can see says none apply. Okay? I said earlier, I think in question 2, that if you leave any question on this survey blank, what that means to us at Monarch when we're reading our results from SurveyMonkey is that there was no response. Okay? So, if the reality is that the person you're interviewing just did respond, but none of these apply, that they don't have any disabling conditions, veteran status, or having been a survivor of domestic violence, then you can just make sure to mark the box with none apply. That's going to be really crucial for us because then we know that none of these apply. We don't think that this person just didn't respond to your inquiries. You can see we also provide a number of definitions here. These are from our quick reference guide. Okay, here's some more. Again, you see here, if a response is given for a household member's demographic characteristics, if no response is given, you can leave it blank. Otherwise, if none apply, make sure you check the none apply box. All right, so this is an example. You can see that you have a bunch of fields already filled out. Maybe the person didn't choose to respond to the ethnicity question, but we do have 2 household members for which none of the household characteristics listed apply, and a number that did have those characteristics apply to them. So be sure to ask a direct question about each characteristic for each household member. This goes back to what's written below it. Check all that apply to each person. So where I'm seeing that listed next to my question, I know I can read each of the options to the respondent to make sure that they know those are the characteristics I'm asking about. Be sure to check none apply if none of them apply to an individual, and only leave all things blank if there's no response given for that individual. So as you can see, you're just following along the row to make sure that you have the information for each household member. Make sure that it's entered consistently for the right person across the line. All right, we're going to move on to the second half or the back side of our survey, and I'm going to turn it over to Charles at this time.
Good afternoon. I will be addressing the remaining portion of the paper survey. Question 8, where was your last permanent address before becoming homeless? As you can see, we have filled out here, town, county, state, country. This question is very straightforward. The client answered accordingly. And as stated in the beginning of the webinar, if no response is given, please leave this section blank. Here on question 9, what was your residence prior to your current living situation? Check 1 only. So check 1 only means that you want to have the client give the answer without influence. So it's important not to read answer options. If the client chooses not to respond, again, leave this question blank. If you do need information regarding definitions, as you can see at the top right corner of the page, there's reference to the data collection guide, pages 7 and 12. That is where you can find corresponding information not only for this slide, but on various slides occurring throughout the webinar. If the respondent's answer is not listed, again, be sure to check other and then describe. Question 10, opposed to the last question, this one you should read each option to the respondent. So here you see which of the following do you or anyone in your household receive. So you want to make sure that you do list all of these options to them so that they could be able to answer, because they may not be aware apply to them or which they could be receiving. So you want to make sure that you read them the answer. If the respondent says he or she has no source of income or is receiving no government benefit, be sure to mark these fields. You can find those at the bottom of the graphic that you see. You could see receiving no government benefits and no source of income. So we really want to make a point of filling that out very accurately, because clients may not have done that previously. So that is something that is very pertinent this year. Question 11, what is your total monthly household income? So this is for all income for household members 18 or older, also all non-earned income for household members 17 or younger. Be sure that this is monthly income and not anything else. It is very easy to confuse this question as how much money they may have to their name at that point in time, but we're really just trying to get strictly their monthly income. For question 12, would you or anyone in your household like to receive any of the following services? And here you see check all that apply. So again, when you see that check all that apply, what you want to do is you want to read them each option, including if they have other things that they're interested in. You see the other option down at the bottom there. We have here English as a second language. Be sure to get what they feel could be appropriate in that situation. And if the respondent's answer is not listed, you want to make sure you do that. For question 13, what was the primary factor that contributed to or caused your current living situation? In parentheses, you see check one only. So for this, you don't want to read the options for the client. Just read the questions and have them formulate the answers independently. And again, at the bottom, you see the other option. If their option is not listed, please describe their issue in the other section. So what you want to do when you're finished with the survey is you want to thank the client for their time. And like I said, at this point, the survey should be completed. From here, you want to make sure that you contact your PIC coordinator and discuss the method of data entry for your community and who to turn the paper surveys into. So you want to make sure and go over and make sure all answers are complete and legible. And remember that you can always look for reference. At the top right corner, you could see, like for example, this here is section 8, page 14 on the top right corner. It also says data collection guide, page 14. That is your reference throughout the survey that you could use at your own need. So next we'll be hearing from Jay regarding the online survey. So I'll be glad to turn it over to him.
Thanks, Charles. And yes, just do make sure when you are doing your paper surveys, as Charles said, make sure you're talking to your point-in-time coordinator, because some communities may have different methods for entering your surveys into our SurveyMonkey tool, which we're going to transition to next. In certain communities, your surveys are going to all be centrally inputted by a single agency or a single team of staff or volunteers. And in some communities, they may ask each individual agency or street team to enter their own surveys into SurveyMonkey. So please make sure you know what your responsibility is as a participant in your community's point-in-time count, and we'll be able to get accurate information and make sure it's all inputted correctly. All right, so we're going to look at how we're inputting the data online. First, a little summary of our time frame. Our practice online survey link is already sent out, so if you haven't seen it or you need to access it, please contact your point-in-time coordinator, or if you are a point-in-time coordinator, make sure everybody that needs it has access to it. Okay, that's just a practice survey link. None of the data inputted there is going to count toward our count. It's going to stop being active on January the 16th. So if you want to take a look at it now. For our live survey link, okay, that's going to be a separate link so there's no confusion, no ifs, ands, or buts. We're going to make sure to send that out in January. It's going to start being available a week prior to the count, but that is only going to be enterable data for programs that have clients that are remaining in their programs on the night of the count. So for instance, one group that sometimes enters data ahead of the point in time count would be boards of social services with temporary rental assistance placements for folks who are in their programs through EA, okay? Even though those folks aren't necessarily counting as homeless, they may still want to be entered in the count. That's an example of someone you know is going to be in your program on the night of the count who would not otherwise be captured in HMIS, and therefore you might want to do a survey ahead of time. Everybody else is going to be using the survey link from this point on, from Wednesday, January 25th through Wednesday, February 8th. And this should say 2017. I apologize about that. Okay, so the reason for that is that this is the point in time count date, the 25th of January, and this is 2 weeks hence. Okay, so you're not going to be able to do the survey with your folks who are on the street because you until the day of the count, because you are not going to be able to ask them about the night of the 24th into the 25th until the 25th. Okay, that corresponds to our date of the count. And just remember, again, contact your point in time coordinator to make sure you're on the same page with them about what point in time methodology you're utilizing. Certain communities do what's called a service-based 7-day count. So that means if I know that there's a program that serves unsheltered folks on Fridays, but our count is on Wednesday, January 25th, I can still survey those folks on that Friday as long as that's what my community is sanctioning for our count methodology. And then I would still be asking about the night of the 24th, so we're comparing apples to apples. Make sure you're in sync with your community on your count methodology and when we're able to complete those point-in-time paper surveys. And then all data must be submitted into the online survey tool no later than Wednesday, February 8th, 2017 by 5 p.m. There's no exceptions to this deadline. The only exception in past years has been because our count date got changed. We make no other exceptions. It's 2 weeks. It's a very simple process to go through on SurveyMonkey, so please don't ask for an extension. We won't be doing it because we want to get you your data deduplicated and completed reports as quickly as possible, so it's useful to you and timely. All right, inputting data online, you can click the link emailed to you for the live link, and then it's recommended that, as I said before, in certain communities, it's just one person from each agency or even one person or one team per community to enter the survey data. This makes a reduction in the data entry differences, right? So one person is calling it the EHT and one is calling it the Ending Homelessness Team at Monarch. We want to make sure that it's done consistently so we have an easier time helping you deduplicate and assess and analyze your data. All right, if more than one person is entering it, just ask them to agree upon a uniform form of data entry. What do we call our agency? What do we call our program? How are we entering this so it's as consistent as possible? If a question requires an answer in SurveyMonkey, okay, it's going to have a little red asterisk to it to show you, but there was no respondent response on the paper survey that you have in front of you, you can always select no response when that happens, okay? So you can remember that. If it's blank, no response. If question 1 on your survey that's in front of you or the gender or age fields in question 7 are blank, don't input the survey online, okay? All right, so note that every question with an asterisk must be answered. In order to move to the next page, you can see, as I mentioned, those red asterisks. If you complete all of the questions on any of the pages of the survey and click the next button, then it will go to the next screen. And if you're ahead of screen and you need to go back to correct something, you can click the Prev button for the previous page. If you're hitting next and you come back to the page you were just on, there's something you've missed. As you can see, it'll say this question requires an answer. Because I forgot to enter the name of my program. And it bounced me back Once I fill this out, complete it, and click the next button, it'll take me to the next page. Boom. All right, so this is page 1 of 4. When you click your survey live link, this is what's going to show. As you can see, we're using our practice survey today, but you can see that it's got code, county, agency, program, just like what's at the top of your survey on your paper survey. Make sure to enter the correct information, and you can click next. That will take you to page 2 of 4. This is not the whole page. This is just the first question on page 2 of 4. Okay, so this corresponds to question 1. You can see that it's a checkbox way of listing the answer, whereas the county, code, and agency fields are type in. Okay, so you click in here and you can use your keyboard to type. You can also hit tab and it will jump you to the next field. But here what we have is a checkbox. You'll probably want to use your mouse in order to check the appropriate box. So if the person stayed in a hotel motel that they paid for. And then if no response is given, you can see that there is a there's no option for that because we don't want you to enter those surveys. If there's no response given, we can't decipher whether that person was homeless. So that's the only occasion in which, if there's no response, you don't have to enter the survey. Okay? If other, our other boxes are type in fields as well. So you'd click in the box and you would type out whatever answer that this person said. If it is an answer that really should be categorized in one of these fields, please make sure to check this box. We have every year folks who say that there's an other answer when really it can be translated and interpreted properly to fall in one of these categories. So please just make sure of that. All right, we're still on page 2 of the online survey, and we're just in question 2. All right, so enter these fields. Again, they're type in fields. This is only if applicable fields, so these would definitely possible blanks in program name and agency name. But let's say that this is a question, even though someone responded to question 1, that there's no response for question 2. If that happens, as you can see, there's a red asterisk. So it's still a required field. So in order to proceed, if no answer is provided, we ask that you type none in the field for town. Okay, because that's going to at least provide the system enough logic to realize that you've answered the question, and it'll let you move on to the next screen at the bottom. Okay, so please leave it blank if nothing else is filled or responded to, but write none in the town field. So we're still on page 2. We just got through questions 1 and 2. We're on to question 3, still on page 2. You can see that the years, months, and days fields have a drop-down menu. If there's no answer given, you can select no response. Again, like I mentioned when we were talking about the paper survey, please simplify the data entry by using all 3 units to the best of your ability. Sorry, I jumped back. And you can see, for instance, if the respondent said they've been homeless for 18 months, enter as 1 year and 6 months. If the respondent answers 45 days, enter 1 month and 15 days. We'd appreciate that help. That's just going to help us calculate more simply. All right? Moving on to question 4, still on page 2 of the online survey. During the past 12 months, how many months have you been homeless on the streets? You can select the drop-down menu, and there is going to be a number option. Again, if someone said none, then there's also a 0 option. And if there's not a response available, so someone didn't respond, there is a no response option. Okay. Question 5, how many separate times? You can make sure you select from the drop-down menu the correct number of times that this person has experienced a homeless episode in the last 3 years. If there's no response, you can select no response. And then again, remember that those distinct episodes should be separate from by at least 7 days in a non-homeless location. All right, this is still page 2 of 4, questions 1 through 5. We have question 6 next. What is the total number of months you've been homeless? So this is again a drop-down menu. If it helps you while you're doing these questions, you can tab across in these sections, right? So I can select from the drop-down here and just hit the tab button. It will tab me over to question 6, and then I can use my keyboard to type in the number that I need, and it'll pre-populate in my drop-down menu. It's a helpful tool if you're doing multiple surveys and entering the data. Again, if the respondent's never been in a homeless location in this time frame, you can enter an A or not applicable. And if they said 0 months or episodes in question 5, you'll be able to answer not applicable, because if they've never been homeless, then there's 0 months or not applicable months of homelessness. And if there's no response, there is a no response option in the drop-down. Again, to the big question of the day, question 7. In the SurveyMonkey tool, who was homeless with you on the night of the count? You can see it is a festival of drop-down menus. Multiple columns here that correspond to what's on your paper survey. The row numbers, again, can help you navigate this question because it corresponds to the row numbers under household characteristics on your paper survey. Always reserve row 1 for self, right, for the head of households information, and be sure the information matches the correct household member. This is a tricky question in SurveyMonkey because of the way it's formatted, so I'm going to go through it in detail. Make sure that you don't get lost. It is tricky, but we really need to get this right. So here goes in explanation. So you can see that the first section has a relationship to head of household, first initial, middle initial, first letter of last name, and second letter of last name, then age. But you can see that there's another column kind of hidden here. Don't forget about gender and ethnicity. All right, let me show you another picture of it. Okay, so you can see that we also have age and gender, and then ethnicity is going to be further over to the right. So what you can do is you can scroll in your browser. You'll be able to scroll to the right, or if you're tabbing across, just hitting tab, it will automatically continue on to those fields that are hidden. Apologize for the hidden nature of a couple of these columns. They're pretty easy to get to once you're entering data, but don't forget about them. It's just because the SurveyMonkey does not allow the window to be wide enough to accommodate every single row, so you have to scroll. So don't forget, because as you can see by the asterisk, at least all of those fields for the first person in your household, the self, must be complete. All right, so here's an example. Who was homeless with you? You could select self. You must select a menu option. And remember, there's a list of possible answers. You can find that in your quick reference guide and abbreviations guide. If the respondent has no middle initial, you can select a none option. If there's no response for any of these fields, you can select no response. If the respondent gives no age, gender, or ethnicity, please again make sure that the surveyor has taken a guess for the respondent but not other household members. And if there's no response listed on the paper survey, make sure that you list it as no response in your SurveyMonkey data entry. Information for the head of household, like I said, there must be complete filled out information for at least the first row in order for you to get past this page, since we are in a required field. And I neglected to mention, but you're on page 3 of 4 in SurveyMonkey. Question 7 has its own page because it's so important and large. Okay, so you can see that we've separated race out, whereas on the paper survey, it's one of the columns listed next to the other options. We had to separate it out because this is one that's a check all that apply. Right, as we discussed in the question, you can write in multiple abbreviations for the racial identities that people identify as. So if they identify as both white and black or African American, I can check off both of those boxes to apply to row number 1, the individual whose information is listed under self, our respondent. Okay, so you can make sure to keep that in mind, even though that's just below the section with those drop-down columns. This is still part of that demographic information field for race. Okay. Under household characteristics, you can check all that apply here. Okay, it's a field of checkboxes. You see the row numbers. Make sure that your row numbers line up with the proper individual whose information you're entering from the paper survey. And again, remember that no response is if it's blank, and none apply is if that last column is filled out. Really critical in our demographic, our household characteristics field. Okay. Once you've made sure all of the information is completed for the household members on this page, page 3 of 4 for question 7, then you can click on next. And then if you get bounced back, you'll know that something's missing for at least the head of household. And just make sure, again, if you have that middle initial one gets people a lot, make sure you're selecting none if that's appropriate, or no response if it was left blank. If you're done, you click next, and then you're on to the back half of your survey, the last page of the online SurveyMonkey tool. So you see page 404. I'm going to turn it over to Charles.
Hello again. So as you can see, Jay started me out perfectly with the first thing you want to notice is that this is the fourth page of the survey, which contains the final 5 questions. So you're on the fourth page, 404. This is question 8. Where was your last permanent address before coming home? The first thing that you may notice here is that there is no asterisk, red asterisk, specifically next to the number 8. What that means is that you can continue on with the survey if these questions are not filled out accordingly or at all. So you will be able to move forward. So basically, much like the paper survey, be sure to enter all the information accordingly with the proper boxes. If no answer has been provided, please leave blank. And if the respondent is not homeless, write NA in the town field. We've moved on to question 9. Again, page 404 in no red asterisk here. Also, as you can see, there are these clickable boxes that you could select, or the clickable dots for this, where you could see clearly what was your residence prior to your current living situation. Check 1 only. That check 1 only again signifies that you will not be reading them to the client. They should be telling you what it is that applies to them directly. So please select one option. Again, if no response is given, check no response down at the bottom. Oh, that is an option for the online surveys, as you can see right here. Instead of having to leave it blank, you can click no response. If the respondent's answer is not included in the list, click in the text box under Other and make sure you type the answer accurately. Again, we're on page 4. This is question 10, and again, no red asterisk. And for this, you could see which of the following do you or anyone in your household receive. Check all that apply. So what you want to do is you want to go down this list, make sure you're very clear about what each one is, and they'll be able to give you the proper information. Another thing that is different with this as opposed to the paper survey is the formatting is just a bit different. So for the formatting, if you look on the paper survey under temporary state disability to the left, you would have no source of income down at the bottom. But for this, no source of income is at the top right of the column. So that's where you would find that. And on this, you could also see that there is a no response option. For question 11, what is your total monthly household income? Again, no red asterisk. This is page 4 of 4. For this, you want to make sure you enter a valid numerical value. The big thing here that you want to make sure not to overlook is you do not want to enter commas or periods. For example, if someone's monthly household income is $1,100, you do not want to put 1,100. It would simply be 1100. And again, if there's no response available, leave the field blank. And much like with the paper survey, this is to be directed towards all non-earned income for household members 17 or younger, and the earned income of all household members 18 or older. Again, on page 404, question 12, no red asterisk. Would you or anyone in your household like to receive any of the following services? Check all that apply. So like we've discussed, when you get a check all that apply option, you want to read the client each option from top to bottom. And like we had mentioned before, there is a no response option at the bottom here. So if they don't respond, you don't have to just click it or skip it. You could select no response. So question 13, page 404, what was the primary factor that contributed or caused your current living situation? Check 1 only. What you want to make sure you do is have the client relay the information to you independently. There is, again, on this, a no response box that you could select, and if the answer is not an option, there is the other that you can use to describe. So, unlike doing a paper, here the first button leads you to the thank you screen. The thank you, if no thank you screen, it has not been submitted. If you do have to do another survey, hitting the done button at the bottom will bring you to the beginning of a new survey that you can use if you're doing more than one survey at once or in a row. So if you're unsure of your work and you click done, you will no longer be able to change the data, so you want to be sure of that. And once you click the thank you, thank you after the survey and the button is the thank you screen is displayed, you can't change the information. And if you would like to enter another survey, like I had said, because you're doing more than one in a row, the done button at the bottom of the screen, this will bring you to another survey where you could begin entering new data.
Just to add on what Charles said, if there's an error in your data after you have submitted the survey online and you're going to enter another survey, just make sure that the only way to change data at that point is to contact Monarch. So please make sure that you have the identifying information of the survey containing the error.
All right, and lastly, I'm going to talk about the sheltered HEMIS count. I described earlier the sheltered summary form that every shelter needs to submit. This is due on January 26th by 5 p.m. And again, you fill it out by county, agency name, program name, HEMIS program name, total number of people served on the night of the count. And so again, when is it 2017 PIC count? It is Tuesday, January 24th. To Wednesday, January 25, 2017. Please make sure your HEMIS data is accurate for this period. Monarch will be comparing HEMIS and summary survey forms, and we will pull all HEMIS data at 1 p.m. on Friday, January 27th for verification. So summary survey form must be submitted to the PIC coordinator by 5 p.m. on January 26, 2017. And we will verify and finalize HEMIS data by Wednesday, February 8, 2017. This will be done. So we want you to verify accuracy of HEMIS data for night of the count, please, by 5 p.m. With updating your HEMIS, we want to ensure accurate information is entered for all program participants for January 24 to January 25, 2017. Please be sure that both individual and household level information is accurate. Please update the household income to reflect current information accurately. We're not asking that you change any client admission information. Just conduct an update. And if you have any questions or you're experiencing any difficulties, please contact your HEMIS provider. Again, answers of don't know or no response will not be accepted as part of the PIC count. Next, important HEMIS fields that you need to be aware of. Again, these are all related to the questions that we've talked about on the survey: name, relation to primary clients, health insurance type, number of times the client has been homeless on the street, residence prior to program entry. These are all the things that we talk about and ask for on the survey, so we just need that this information be accurately updated. Next, we want to make sure that these fields are accurate to determine whether a client is chronically homeless. So there are some questions there that are very important, and we stress that they please be updated and are accurate, which include the approximate date of homelessness started, number of times the client has been homeless on the street, the total number of months homeless on the street. length of program stay, disabling condition, physical disability, developmental disability, chronic health condition, HIV or AIDS diagnosis, mental health problem, and substance abuse. Next, the following fields are used to determine the client demographic information and to create unique identifiers for identification. So that is name, relation to primary client, date of birth, race, gender, and ethnicity. You see, when we say date of birth, we want to make sure that this is accurate and not confused with admission date. So again, stressing that you please verify your HIMAS data before, during, and after the count before submission. The next thing is the information we need for to determine the client income information. And so that's the monthly income amount, monthly income sources, the non-cash benefit types, and the health insurance types. Please update the fields if necessary so that the HIMAS record matches what a client survey would say. This will help ensure the records can be effectively deduplicated. So we want to make sure that we're not, counting the same person twice. And then the following fields are used to determine client disabilities or subpopulation characteristics. Some of them we've talked about, for example, but unique will be the domestic violence victim or survivor and veteran status. Again, these are very important fields that we want you to make sure you have updated. Lastly, we have the fields that we use to determine client status prior to program entry, which is residence prior to program entry, zip code of last permanent address, the cause of homelessness, and the services sought. So please, again, like I'm saying, make sure you update your HIMS records. If you're unsure about how to update or correct data in HIMS and your COC subscribes to Foothold Awards HIMAS software, you can go onto their website or contact them to ensure how you can, accurately update this information, process new intakes, or enter additional household numbers. Their website and phone number is listed here. You can call them and make sure that you have all the, you have everything done accurately. For questions, please contact your local point-in-time coordinator. This is one of 2 PIP webinars that we'll be doing. The next one will be January 23rd at 2 p.m. Again, you can always get this information on our website. Please share it with your volunteers. Make sure they watch this so you're accurately prepared for the day of the count. And with that, that completes our webinar. We want to thank you. Again, all of the information that you need can be found on our website, monarchhousing.org. And you can always email us at NJCounts@monarchhousing.org if you have any questions, or call the number that is listed. Make sure you talk to your PIPS coordinator if you have any other questions, and we are here for anything that you need. So thank you.